Hey friends, Matt Tinkler here with Abletontips by Production Music Live, and in this video I'm going to take you through the process of making your very first drum beat using Ableton Live 12. Let's dive right in. So to start with, we're going to start in the arrangement view of Ableton Live in order to put together our drum beat. If you don't know how to get to the arrangement view, if you're not there, just make sure you press the tab key on your keyboard. If you're in the session view here, press the tab key. That will take you to the arrangement view in your Ableton Live session. Next up, we need to go ahead and start with a kick drum sound. So for this drum beat, I'm going to use just the 909 sound. So the 909 is a old school popular drum machine, which is very popular, used in a lot of like house and techno music and stuff like that. And Ableton Live, any of the editions come inbuilt with some 909 sounds. And in order to find these, I'm actually going to go to the packs section in Places. And here you should find a pack that says Core Library. I'll probably have a few more packs than you do, but you should see Core Library somewhere. I'm going to unfold Core Library, come down to the Samples folder within Core Library, unfold that, and then we're going to go to One-Shots, Drums, and then here we can find all of our one-shot drum samples that come pre-installed with the software. So to start with, we're going to start with the kick drum. I'm going to open up Kick, and I'm going to go ahead and find the 909 kick. We scroll down, we can see there's a few different 909s. We've got 1, 2, some layers. I'm going to go ahead and grab this number 1, kick 909. And in order to just start off making our drum beat, I'm going to select the very first MIDI track here and click and drag this kick 909 sound onto the bottom device view section where it says drop an instrument or sample here. And in doing so, that's going to add this kick drum sample to a simpler device, which is going to allow us to play back this kick drum using MIDI. So let's go ahead and just zoom in a little bit in our arrangement view by holding down Command or Control and just scrolling up. And I'm going to go ahead and create a 4-bar long MIDI clip. To do this, I'm going to select from bar 9 to bar 13, right click, and come down to where it says Insert Empty MIDI Clip. And it's going to create a MIDI clip for us. And now we can input notes on any of these different notes here or pitches here in this piano roll in our MIDI editor in order to play back that kick drum at a different pitch. In order to hear what the kick drum is going to sound like at any of these different pitches, I'm actually just going to go ahead and engage the MIDI editor preview button, which is this little headphone icon here. And now I can click on any of these notes and hear what that kick drum is going to sound like when played back at any of these pitches. Because I want it to be played back at the original recorded pitch, I'm actually going to input some notes on this C3 right here. So because we want to create just a really simple kind of house drum beat or rhythm, I'm going to go ahead and just put a kick drum on every single beat of the bar. If we zoom in a little bit, we can see that this kind of editor section here is evenly divided into these different little blocks here. And up the top, we can see some numbers. We can see 1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and then 2. So music in general is divided up into what we call bars, and then each bar is generally divided up into a number of beats, normally 4 beats. And these different 4 beats here are denoted by this 0.2 or 0.1 here, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, and then we roll around to bar 2, bar 2 beat 2, bar 2 beat 3, bar 2 beat 4, etc. So I'm going to add a kick drum just by double clicking on these sections here on each beat of the bar. And now, because we only have 1 bar filled out here, I don't want to go ahead and fill out the rest of the 4 bars. So I'm just going to go ahead and move my cursor up to the top where we have this blue loop brace here in this clip, and just click and drag this so that we've selected only that first bar. And you'll see now that even though we only have 1 bar worth of notes here in this MIDI editor up in our arrangement, we still have that 4-bar long MIDI clip. It's just that same single bar, which is repeated 4 times. So let's play this and hear what it sounds like. Now you'll notice that it's kind of cutting off a little bit quickly, and that's because of the setting of the simpler device that our kick drum is loaded up into. So let's go ahead and switch back to our device view with the Shift and Tab key. And now, in order so that we play back the entirety of this kick drum sample, I'm just going to go ahead on the left-hand side of this simpler device here and switch it to one-shot mode. And now what's going to happen in one-shot mode is that every single time a note is triggered and sent into this simpler device, it's going to play back the entirety of the sample instead of stopping every single time one of these notes stops. We can also go ahead here and change things like increase the output volume. We can transpose it as well using this transpose button or option. I'm actually just going to double click on this and leave it set to 0. And we can even shorten the length of the kick drum sample by moving our cursor over to the right, clicking on this sample endpoint, and just clicking and dragging this in. And if it's getting a little bit too clicky, I can also fade this out, the fade out control here. Let's go ahead and loop this 4 bars in our arrangement. So I'm just going to zoom in, select this 4 bars, and press Command or Control and L on my keyboard. And that's going to loop this 4 bars in my arrangement so that when my playhead gets to the end of this loop brace, it'll just jump straight back to the start. And now let's find a good tempo to play this back at. Currently we're set to 120. Let's set this to say 125 by simply clicking on our tempo in the top left corner and typing in 1, 2, 5. Cool, so there we have our basic kick drum. Let's go ahead now and add a clap to layer with this kick. So let's go back to our browser, close up the kick folder and go to the clap folder here and find a 909 clap. We can see there's 2 909 claps. Let's grab this clap 909 basic one here, and let's click and drag this onto one of the audio tracks here in our session. So just to keep things neat and tidy, before we actually go ahead and do that, let's delete this second MIDI track by selecting it, deleting that, and let's delete this third audio track here by selecting that and pressing delete or backspace on our keyboard to delete that. Zoom in a little bit, and now let's go ahead and click and drag this clap directly onto this second audio track in our arrangement view. And I'm going to go ahead and actually put this on beat 2 of bar 9 here. So as our really kind of simple drum beat, we're going to go ahead and have a kick drum on every beat of the bar, and then our clap is going to be on every second and fourth beat of the bar. So we can see that this clap is a little bit long at the moment. In order to trim this and make it a bit shorter, I'm just going to go ahead and move my cursor to the top right of this clip until it turns into this square bracket, and just click and drag back a little bit. And then I can also go ahead and adjust the kind of fade out of this clip by zooming in. And we can see when I'm hovering over this audio waveform here, the top and bottom, left and right, the corners of this clip have these little squares on them. And these allow us to actually create fade ins and outs of our clips. If I just click and drag on the top one, so I can make that clap a little bit snappier. So that's also a little bit loud at the moment. So let's go ahead and turn down this clap. And just for the sake of it, we'll turn down the kick drum as well. So let's turn down the clap by selecting the clap track, moving over to the right-hand side and clicking and dragging down on this track volume here, which is right underneath number 2. And let's go ahead and do the same with the kick drum. Just drag that down a little bit as well. Cool. So now that we have this clap on beat 2, let's make the same thing happen on beat 4. And to do this, I'm going to just select this first 2 beats and press Command or Control and D on my keyboard to duplicate that. And now that I have that as for 1 bar, let's go ahead and select this whole bar here. Again, Command or Control and D to duplicate. Hold down Shift, click at bar 9 here on this same track, and then Command or Control and D to duplicate that again. And now we have that same clap on the second and fourth beat of every bar for this 4-bar loop. It's still a little bit loud, so I'm just going to turn down that clap. And now let's go ahead and add some hi-hats in here to kind of give this beat a little bit more groove and drive. So to start with, I'm going to go ahead and create another MIDI track. We're going to use a drum rack to input our new hi-hats. To create a MIDI track, simply right-click in this area underneath our track title bars, our headers, and click on Insert MIDI Track, or you can use the keyboard command, which is Command or Control, Shift, and T. That will create a new MIDI track for us. Next, let's grab a drum rack. So to grab a drum rack, all I need to do is go over to my Instruments section in the library in my browser and simply find drum rack. And I can just click and drag this onto the MIDI track. Now we can see we have an empty drum rack loaded up onto this MIDI track. And a drum rack is basically just a way for us to have multiple single sample sounds or single sounds on a single track. We could have added the kick drum and the clap to a drum rack as well, but just for the sake of showing you different ways of programming in these individual sounds, I wanted to do them on their own individual tracks. And now we're going to use a drum rack, and in this drum rack I'm going to go back to the pack section and find some hi-hats here. So let's go to the hi-hat section, find a closed 909 hi-hat, click and drag this onto C1 in our drum rack and scroll down. And let's go and find a hi-hat open. Scroll down a little bit, hi-hat open 909. Click and drag this onto C#1. And now you can see we can play back these samples on these different pads just with the little play button. And now we're going to program in these samples to play in the exact same way that we did with the kick drum previously. So let's go ahead and create just a single bar here of a MIDI clip by selecting, right-clicking, clicking Insert Empty MIDI Clip. And now I'm going to go ahead and put an open hi-hat just on every middle bit in between every beat of this bar. And this would be called putting this on the off beat. So each of the different beats we could call, say, on the beat, and directly in between each of these beats, where these open hi-hats now are, that is our off beat. So now we have our open hi-hats on every single off beat of the first bar here. Let's just turn this down because it's going to be quite a little bit loud. And you'll also notice that as soon as I load up one of these samples into the drum rack, I don't need to go ahead and select one-shot mode on the sampler. It's on the simpler rather, it's done this by default. You can see it's already on one-shot mode for the open hi-hat and for the closed hi-hat as well. Now that we have this single bar here, I can actually just go ahead and loop this 1 bar long MIDI clip out for the whole rest of the 4 bars by clicking and dragging with that square bracket icon here. And now we have, again, this 1 bar long MIDI clip that's been extended out for 4 bars. If for whatever reason you can't do this, you just need to make sure in the MIDI clip you have this loop option enabled. If this loop switch is turned off, you won't be able to loop it out like I have here. So again, you just need to make sure that loop option is enabled. Cool. So now let's go ahead and add in some closed hi-hats. I'm going to go ahead and add in a closed hi-hat on every single 16th note here. And there's a few different ways that we can do this, but one of the easiest ways is to simply add a hi-hat here onto this note. And I'm just going to click and drag this out all the way. And then I'm going to change my grid size, make sure my grid size here inside of our MIDI clip editor is set to 16th notes, which it currently is. If it's not set to 16th notes, we can change this by going up to the top right of our clip where it says 1/16th and setting this to 16th notes, or by simply using the keyboard command, Command and 2 or Control and 2 to increase the size of our grid, or Control or Command and 1 to decrease the size of our grid until it says 16th notes. And then I'm going to select this hi-hat note here, right-click it, and come down to Chop Notes on Grid, which is a feature in Ableton Live 12. And now we can see that all of these hi-hats or that single long hi-hat note, is now multiple 16th note hi-hat notes. Now, in this clip, this closed hi-hat sound is a little bit too loud for me over the open hi-hat sound. So instead of going ahead and turning down the track as a whole on that drum rack, I can just turn down the velocity of these closed hi-hats to make those play at a softer level. To do this, I can select all of these hi-hats by clicking on this hi-hat closed note here, holding down the Command or the, I think it's the Alt key on Windows, and then clicking and dragging down on each of these notes. And you'll see that they become a darker shade of whatever color they are in this clip. And you'll see a little number show up, which is denoting the velocity of these. If for whatever reason doing this isn't working, you can go ahead and go down to this velocity section in the bottom and just click and drag on any of these highlighted bars. And that will allow you to turn down the velocity of these notes as well. To add a little bit more movement and interest to these hi-hats as well, instead of having all of these closed hi-hats be the same velocity, I'm just going to go ahead and randomize the velocity of them a little bit and kind of make it so that they move in time with the music a little bit more. So to do this, let's just increase the velocity of this second hi-hat note, the third hi-hat note, and the fourth hi-hat note, just a little bit less than that third hi-hat note. And now I'm going to select all these just by clicking and dragging and then pressing the Command and D or Control and D to duplicate these. And now they are kind of a little bit more humanized in their feeling and they move a little bit more with the music. And we can go ahead and even randomize the velocity of these slightly by simply, again, selecting all of these different notes, coming down to the bottom where we have this velocity randomize option and this slider next to where it says randomize. I'm just going to drag this down a little bit. And you can see that as I do this, it randomly adjusts the velocities of those selected notes. So let's just increase that a little bit so we can get some randomization on the volume of each of these different hi-hat notes. Cool, so now we have the hi-hats. Let's go ahead and add in some further percussion here as well. And to do this, I'm just going to add in some extra samples onto this drum rack track that we have for our hi-hats. Let's go ahead and hit Shift and Tab on our keyboard to switch back to our device view. Let's go ahead and find a 909 tom sample. So let's close up our hi-hats in our browser, come down to tom, and see if we can find tom 909. Here we go, there's a few different 909 toms. I'm going to go ahead and get this tom 909 low and click and drag this into the drum rack onto any of the pads. It really doesn't matter which. Let's just put it on D1 here. And let's go ahead now and program in this tom again in this drum rack. Open up our MIDI clip by double clicking on that top section of the MIDI clip so our cursor turns to this hand icon. And now I'm going to click in a really simple pattern for this tom, which is the last 16th note, which is this one right here of the first beat of the bar, and then the second 16th note or the off beat of the second beat of the bar. And we're going to repeat that again for beats 3 and beat 4. Cool. And again, let's just change the balance of these by increasing their velocity. I'll select all these toms, increase their volume a little bit, make them a little bit louder. And we can again hear that they're kind of lasting a little bit too long. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is shift back to our device view here. And instead of switching to the classic mode, I'm going to stay in this one-shot mode. I'm going to change this one shot of this simpler here to gate. And what this is going to do is play the sample for as long as the MIDI note in the clip is held down for. So you can see if I kind of play this note, play it really quickly, it'll cut off. But if I hold it down, it'll play the whole note. And just to stop this from kind of clicking at the end of the sound, I'm going to increase the fade out a little bit as well. And if we want to have this play a different pitch, you could also change the transposition here to maybe pitch it down 2 semitones. Let's go back into our MIDI clip and just increase the length of the second and fourth tom hits by holding down the Shift key and clicking and dragging to select that one. And just click and drag on the right-hand side to increase the length of these so that the first tom hit is short and the second one and fourth one here are a bit longer. Cool, so now we have our simple basic drum beat. Let's go ahead and extend this out to 8 bars long. So what I'm going to do here is just zoom out a little bit and I'm going to select this whole 4 bars that we have and press Command or Control and D to duplicate these across to the whole 8 bars. Let's select all of this 8 bars, press Command and L to loop this in our arrangement view. And let's go ahead and add a little bit of variation and some more interest to our drum beat. First of all, I'm going to add a bit of an impactful sound to the beginning of this loop in the form of a crash cymbal. So I'm going to go ahead, scroll up, go to Cymbal and find Crash 909. And that's going to now be the sound that we'll use at the beginning of this drum beat to kind of, say, hi, this drum beat's here and it's happening and it's just a kind of impactful sound. And to do this, I'm just going to click and drag this crash sample to where it says drop files and devices here. And I'm going to do this right on bar 9. And you'll notice when I do this, it'll actually create an audio track for me with that crash sample there. Again, this is going to be quite loud immediately, so I'll just pull this down in terms of its level. Pull that down a little bit more. Pretty cool. And now let's go ahead and just re-pitch this crash cymbal sound by double clicking on the device title or on that clip title bar here of the crash, coming down to the pitch option. Let's just pitch it down a little bit, maybe 2 semitones. You could pitch it up as well. But to kind of keep the impact here, I just want to pitch it down a little bit. And I think 2 semitones is going to work quite well. Let's press Shift and Tab now to switch back to our device view, zoom out, and let's go ahead and add in a little bit of a snare roll here at the end of this beat. And again, I'm going to do this in MIDI. So I'm going to go actually to this drum rack here. I'm going to add in a 909 snare sound, find our 909 snare, so there's a few different ones here. I think this tune 1 sounds pretty good. So I'm going to click and drag this again into this drum rack. But I only want this to happen for this last bar here in our 8-bar loop. So what I'm going to do actually is select this last bar of this MIDI clip and split this out from the rest of this loop here by pressing Command or Control and E. And now we can see that this clip is separated from the other clips on that same track. And what this is going to allow me to do is to double click and open this up and add in some extra notes here in this MIDI clip without affecting the other MIDI clips on that track. So let's go ahead and add in a snare on every 16th note of the last beat of this bar. And I'm actually going to ramp up these snares in velocity by coming down to, or selecting them first of all, coming down to this section where it says ramp, where we went to randomize earlier, and just dragging down this first number. And we can play around with dragging up this second number as well. And you'll notice as I do this, we have the velocities of these selected notes start to ramp up over the course of the time selection. So for me there, it starts a little bit too soft. So I'm going to increase that first number. And overall, this snare sound I think could be a little bit louder. So I'm actually going to go ahead and switch back to our device view, find this snare in the simpler, and just increase the volume of this simpler a little bit by clicking and dragging up on the volume control. Cool. I think that sounds pretty good. Let's go ahead and zoom out and just add a little bit more variation to our drum beat by going ahead and maybe removing the closed hi-hat from the first 4 bars here of our beat. So I can just select this first 4 bars of this MIDI clip on our drum rack here. You can see this is all just that same 1 bar repeated. I can go ahead and just select all the closed hi-hats, and I can either delete them with the backspace or delete key on my keyboard, or I can just mute them by pressing the 0 key on my keyboard. And that will still leave them there as MIDI notes in case I want to kind of add them back in later, but they won't actually play, so it's not going to affect the sound in any way, shape, or form. I just like using this method over deleting the samples entirely. So now let's go ahead and have a listen to what we have. Cool, and then you'll see when it hits bar 13, we have the closed hi-hats come back in. And maybe just for a little bit extra variation, let's go ahead and just remove this kick drum here on this last beat of bar 12 by just selecting that and just pressing the delete key. So now we don't have a kick drum on that last beat here at bar 12. Instead, we have just nothing, so it's got the clap. So it just leads in a little bit nicer into this second lot of 4 bars. Cool, that's sounding pretty good. Let's go ahead and just organize this a little bit. So I'm going to rename this first track here by right-clicking, clicking on rename, calling this kick. And then I can just press the tab key to jump to the next track. Tab key on my keyboard, rename this to clap. Tab key, rename this drum rack to maybe percussion. And then this crash, let's just rename that to crash, just for a little bit of extra organization. And now we can go ahead and maybe recolor these as well. So maybe I want my kick here to be this orange. Right-click on this kick and click on Assign Track Color to Clips. And what that's going to do is go ahead and make the MIDI clips on that kick track the same color as what I made the actual kick track itself. Let's go ahead and do the same. This clap track here, let's make that red. Right-click, Assign Track Color to Clips. The percussion, this can stay green, and maybe the crash symbol here, we could make that yellow. Once again, right-click and Assign Track Color to Clips. And so now we've made our very first drum beat in Ableton Live, and this is what it sounds like. So I hope that was useful to you. Please feel free to go ahead and ask any questions you might have in the comments, and check out the links in the description for a full start to finish course on how to make your own music in Ableton Live 12. Otherwise, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next video.